So maybe we'll start while the presentation is being set up. So, okay?
Not bad.
Okay, so hi, welcome everyone to this session on Creative AI Futures, Theory and Practice. I'm Joanna Zelinska, I'm Professor of Media Philosophy and Critical Digital Practice at King's College London, and I'm here with Eva Jäger, who is a curator in arts technology at Serpentine Gallery, and Alistair Mill, who is a PhD student between King's and Serpentine, and we are part of the lab. As part of our panel, we're going to talk about some practical and conceptual issues. And hopefully some of these issues, or most of these issues, are of interest to this community, not just to us as the panelists. The panel arises out of the work of additional people, our colleague Mercedes Bunz, our colleague Daniel Chavez Eras, who are not here with us, but who are also working as part of that lab, about which my colleagues will speak a bit more. I'll just introduce what we're going to be doing today. How do we change the slides?
Can you scroll down?
Just give me a cue.
So just say next.
Next,
Yeah,
please. So we're going to be talking about a number of kind of key issues that a lot of people working with machine learning, technology, and AI are dealing with today. You know, how does the current use of AI raise bigger questions about the very nature of artistic production? Who is the artist now? What about the human-machine collaborations, the change in agency? Does AI create new audiences for art? Do these audiences require training? Do arts institutions have a new task these days to train both producers and the audiences in understanding what's going on beyond the garish visuality? And what role can AI art practice play in exploring alternative visions of the future, as well as enabling public understanding of that technology? And I'll hand over to Eva now, who can talk about the practical context of our collaborations, of where it all came from.
Hi everyone. So yeah, the Creative AI Lab started in 2019, and it's a site of inquiry into how to theorize, how to historicize, and how to facilitate the creation of machine learning art. And it's really important to us when thinking about kind of art and technology to center artistic research and take it very seriously as a theoretic contributor and also a technical contributor to this space. We created this diagram because we're thinking a lot about interoperability. When we are working with something like Creative AI, we span many different disciplines, and the interoperability between institutions like the Serpentine and King's College Digital Humanities Department is quite important for creating new pipelines. So, for instance, the Serpentine's R&D platform has a network of artists that we work with, and as a curator, I'm part of production teams, usually managing technical production as well as doing the curation. And we have, of course, our public interface, which is often something that academics don't prioritize, if I can be so bold. And King's College London, of course, has their network and their theoretical expertise and the research interface to an incredible wealth of knowledge. So we've been really thinking about how to create, as I said, new pipeline for creation where we can utilize the strengths of both of these communities, both of these institutions. And our work, next slide. And our work is also reflexive in the sense that we want to work to improve institutional capabilities, both at Serpentine and at King's. So something I think about a lot is, what does the future museum, this is something I know you guys will talk about tomorrow, look like as a space for inquiry into advanced technologies? And what are the new capabilities of curators and museum workers, people who install shows and produce shows, to be able to critically and technically engage with this work at the level of industry? This kind kind of stems from a position that came from an insight that Mercedes Buns, our colleague, and I produced in a paper we wrote last year, which was really about centering something we are calling the back end of art making practices. So we're distinguishing the back end from the front end. Front end in this case being projects as they're understood by the public when they move into the gallery space as part of an exhibition, and the back end of artistic practices being the data identification, collection, cleaning, and labeling, and so on. And that artists participate with, teams of developers, this sort of testing and iterative outputs. And it's this feedback loop that we're really interested in, and we propose as the new site for artistic production. It's where the work is happening. And that's why we need these sort of advanced capabilities that we're trying to grow within the lab. Next slide. We've done this so far in a couple of different ways by producing some resources. For instance, this database, which you can find at creative-ai.org. It's a database of creative AI tools and resources, courses, and also writings by artists and theorists, also computer scientists. We wanted to create an ecosystem for people who are creating in this space to find practical and also more thought-led work on machine learning. Next slide. We've produced a number of readers that have also had panel discussions around them, around topics of aesthetics and new interfaces that artists are producing and AI entanglements. Next slide. And more recently, we've tried to create sort of experimental editorial frameworks for artists to be able to use the institution as a platform and produce ways of them talking about that back end. So in this case, what I'm showing is a series we've titled R&D Labyrinth, which streams live on our Twitch. And it's a game where artists navigate through a kind of labyrinthine space and use it as an opportunity to talk about the data sets that they work with, the software that they're using, and the kind of conceptual narratives that they carry from the technical into the production. I think I can hand it over to Alistair.
Cool. Does this one work? Is that the better one? Can I have the next slide, please? Cool. Yeah, so I'm going to just run through some of the observations from the State of the Field section of the position paper, which is in the proceedings. Obviously, in addition to what Eva has kind of just said, lots of practitioners and institutions are working with machine learning at the moment. And it's worth considering how the terminology itself has evolved out of that broader network beyond, like, obviously what we're doing here. So in a way, we kind of begin asking in the paper whether all of this terminology refers to the same phenomenon, and how we can usefully use these concepts to make worthwhile distinctions. At the same time, these terms are perhaps better understood as names for discourses rather than distinct phenomena in themselves. Various members of the lab as well have used different of these concepts, and there are many others that people use as well. But part of the function of thinking about the way we work with this top-level terminology, I guess, is to both reconcile and even sometimes re-engineer a set of interrelated concepts. So with that in mind, thinking about creative AI as a term, it kind of comes from a technical community which uses it to refer to the application of machine learning and other forms of AI for artistic purposes. But the art world, in turn, prefers to use terms like AI art and less frequently machine learning art, elsewhere computer art. Previously, people have used the broader term media art. Different discourses, including cognitive scientists, talk about computational creativity as a kind of adjacent field of research. So, there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of findings coming out of all of these different fields. People are talking about the same thing in different places, and it's a little bit about reconciling all of these, I guess, different insights. So our own adoption of creative AI as a label for the work in the lab kind of goes back to our focus on the processual, the technical, and to signal that we're interested in producing more than just, I guess, artistic artifacts. Yeah, so AI art, despite its novelty specifically, has already kind of become established as a substantial subfield, and it's populated by practitioners who break down traditional disciplinary boundaries. Given the high level of expertise required of both artists and audiences in producing and accessing at least some of the artistic outputs produced in this field, AI art has led to a further destabilization of ecosystem roles such as artist, curator, technologist, theorist, producer, etc. And those various practices have provoked in turn a number of theoretical and art historical discussions. You might be familiar with Joanna's book, AI Art, which offers a critical reflection on the field. There are lots of other interesting discourses happening in this space as well. I've also included in the diagram actually artists who work with machine learning, which has come out of various internal discussions we've been having, because this kind of less formal way of marking out the field is, I guess, a little bit more agnostic in its expectations. And in a way it can act as a kind of temporary placeholder while the rest of the terminology that we're using here stabilizes over time. And as an aside, actually, it's kind of interesting to think about the fact that this looser terminology leaves space for the post-digital practices we heard about earlier on. You know, artists who don't fit into a particular field or community, but use machine learning in a more varied context. So it's kind of worth thinking about that as well, I think. Yeah, starting from an attempt to conceptualize the operations of those creative, curatorial, technical practices facilitated by AI, it's also expanded to an extent philosophical debates around authorship, agency, creativity, epistemology, etc. Can I get the next slide, please, actually? I'm just going to quickly talk about one of the kind of shifts we discussed in the paper as well. It's just one way of many thinking about the macro level shifts taking place around the way people are working with machine learning. But within the current AI field, there are kind of these two subsets or strands that interrelate, and you know, really this arrow is here, it shouldn't be an arrow. They really should just be two interrelated strands. But you know, the first one is kind of occupied by artists like Mama Atkin, Mario Klingman, Anna Riddler, Ganadol, etc., who were kind of early in interrogating the new aesthetic possibilities of dreamlike generative worlds, as well as data visualization, so scrutinize widespread algorithmic tendencies in AI tools. And the initial, okay, yeah. So then within the second strand, you could take examples like artists and collectives such as Orphan Drift, Daniel Braithwaite Shirley, forensic architecture was mentioned earlier on actually. You know, artists and collectives that work with machine learning but don't necessarily fit into this kind of specific field, which is AI art, right? So the embedding of AI and machine learning within a sensory apparatus, for example, like a video game or a surveillance system, mirrors the technology's wider societal deployment with the view to enacting Marshall McLuhan's suggestion that art is an early warning system. Like most innovations, with machine learning, it's about finding a balance between allowing them to become a naturalized part of a broad toolkit, but also having space for exploring new ways of using them, while still subjecting them to the really domain-specific kind of examination that you got in those kind of earlier practices in the generative side. Can I get the next slide? I'm going to run through these quickly. The part of the purpose of this is because it kind of reflects the technological deployment you see with machine learning as a broader field, right? It's kind of defined by where it's deployed. So that, in a way, feeds back into this idea of integrating machine learning into a broader set of practices. Yeah, one more slide, please. And then I'm done. Can I get the next slide? Thank you. Yeah, so yeah, here are just a couple of examples of the practices that we've been engaged with as a lab via Serpentine. These are both stills from Twitch events, which you can find on the Serpentine Twitch page if you're interested. But yeah, Daniel Braithwaite Shirley, who is engaged in integrating eye tracking technology and face scanning technology, both AI technologies, into a video game context, and Interspecies Research Communication Initiative, which is a collaboration between Orphan Drift and Ethic Lab, who are using machine learning to develop a reciprocal sensory system to train a reinforcement learning system using a cephalopod. So I think it's worth mentioning that both of these projects kind of fit into a prototyping agenda, which is a way of taking a technology and putting it somewhere specific, developing it in a particular context, often in a kind of combination with other technologies. Okay, there you go.
Okay. Next slide, please. And Eva spoke about how we are supporting artists as well as being interested in what we're calling the back end of artistic technological practice, understanding the technology, understanding the infrastructure, the broader systems on which the things are running. But also Alistair talked about the conceptual side of it, and hopefully you can see through that the lab is for us. It's not just about our lab. The lab itself becomes a space of conceptual experimentation. So we are using the lab as a space where we can experiment with ideas about what AI art can be, what creative AI can become, not just in our hands or in the hands of our artists, but also for a broader community. And in the last part of our presentation, I would like to ask a few questions about where creative AI can go, given the wider context, which is also political and socio-economic. And we are asking questions about who owns the platforms, who owns the technology, the kind of domination of perception and cognition by the increasingly narrower group of actors, be it Silicon Valley or China, and what it means for us, as researchers, as artists, as technologies, to be part of that infrastructure. And also, next slide, please. So as part of that analysis, which is important to us, we also want to make a proposal, working with the recognition of the historical trajectory of not just AI, but also kind of IT more broadly, and its proposal for 4C, which was the model, which was based on the mission accomplishment and based on the cybernetic logic, its original military associations, 4C of command, control, communication, computer, that you all will be familiar with. We've proposed a 5C model, and we've switched the nouns to adjectives to go a bit softer, less propositional, more playful perhaps. And our 5C stands for creative, critical, constructive, collaborative, computational. So with that, we are trying to open up a different model of working. So for our lab, we're very interested in working with other labs and organizations. We're not trying to go along the logic of my lab is bigger than yours, or my AI is bigger than yours. We're trying to kind of go against that kind of masculinist logic that underpinned IT for a very long time, and trying to develop some other ways of working, other ways of thinking, creating as well. So we are developing a horizontal network of actors and organizations with whom we are trying to enter into a dialogue, a collaboration, a set of practices. And the critical dimension is crucial to our exploration of the creative and the constructive, and that element of something being computational obviously still in some way frames what we are doing. Next slide, please. Oh, so I think something's happening because that happened to a previous presentation. The last slides are going, but that's okay. So I'd like to leave you with a few questions for the future that we are putting on the table, and they are available in our paper. So we think we're trying to explore what the future areas for a creative AI might be. One is the question posed by our colleague Mercedes Bunz about what happens to culture if it's being reconfigured now as a domain of not just human-made meanings, but also machine calculation. We're also interested, partly speculatively and philosophically, in the developments around artificial consciousness. We are realizing that for some researchers, be it philosophers or computer scientists or cognitive scientists, this is a no-go area. It seems completely ridiculous, non-scientific, let's just forget about this. On the other hand, there is more and more serious research going on in IT around artificial consciousness. From an art perspective, that becomes an interesting point of encounter. We are also interested in a shift from machine vision to machine perception. It's not just us, it's Google as well. Google has now officially started using machine perception in lieu of machine vision. Yet we're trying to do something both critical and creative with that concept. And last but not least, we are opening up from computationalist perspectives to embrace some other models, be it, cognitivism, connectivism, and, what good old philosophy called phenomenology, and trying to see what happens at these interstices. So, and we are open, as we said, in line with our 5C model. We would like to kind of work with people, talk with people, with groups. Thank you very much, and we can discuss.
Thank you very much. I was aware as you were talking that you really have put a lot of work into that presentation. I much appreciated it, as did everybody else here. I hope you didn't feel rushed, but I think we got your message. May I just ask a question? You were saying that you're aiming to work with other organisations. Do you mean in the UK, or do you mean everywhere? Or what's your plan in that way?
Well, I suppose our plan isn't to go and conquer the world. It's much more because it's not about growth and that kind of both techno-scientific and academic desire to, let us get as big as we can, but much more about being interested and finding interesting, stimulating collaborations.
Yeah.
So it could be small in scale, but wide in scope. What do you think?
No, I think it goes back to my point about interoperability. So really thinking about where we can help each other. We already work with lots of partners in the US and throughout Europe. We would love to work with partners in Asia.
Thank you. I mean, I think you see you're analogous in a way to the EVA organisation because it's worldwide. It's fairly flexible, as you gather, and it's beginning to come. It's very interesting that the pandemic has actually brought us closer together. For instance, after this talk, as you've well gathered, we're having one of our EVA international sessions in which we'll be joined by not just EVAs around the world, but individuals and other organisations around the world, just as you are intimating that you want to do and are already doing. And the thing that's actually caused that desire to communicate in possibly a new and more determined way is, of course, the pandemic, which is also influenced what you were thinking about. It's influenced all of us. When you think of it, it's a major event in our lives, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I mean, I hardly dare say it, but it's like a war. I mean, it's had that sort of impact. And for instance, I live in the City of London, and it's had an amazing impact on the city. And the city will never, ever recover to what it was before. It will change. It might change for the better. But it's like a great fire. It's as radical as that. And I think you're intimating these sort of activities. No questions at the moment, Graham.
Yes, there are questions.
Sorry, there are two questions.
There are questions. Give me.
Please,
you hand up first.
Sorry, it was very, very interesting. I'm very interested in your research. Is it working?
Yep.
So I'm thinking about how can we engage? And there's this awful word is about funding models. I'm sorry to bring it up, but I was wondering what your economic model was, or even an share and exchange model, if we don't go down the traditional routes. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak from Serpentine's side. This was an experiment in accessing research funding. Serpentine is not a research institution, and we typically work with state funding and philanthropy. And so by partnering with King's, we've opened up a new avenue towards research funding, which has a lot of different implications. Most prominently, I think it has to do with the duration of time that we can spend on research. So an exhibition budget is typically spent in 6 months to a year, whereas with these kinds of research projects, we can plan 3 to 5 years in advance, which really changes the way that we operate as an arts institution. attribution.
And the lab was originally was founded by Eva and Mercedes Bunz and was funded by an AHRC grant, and Alistair's PhD is funded by that,
lab.
by the lab as well as part of that. However, at the same time, I come from a kind of radical open access movement, which is also has a lot to do with a kind of open source movement, hackers community. So you also do a lot of work for free, and I'm not advocating free labor, but you shift, if you're a salaried academic, for example, you shift your labor towards causes that you find meaningful and important. So you think, I'm dedicating some of my time to support some initiatives, as part of my research time or as part of my citizenship, as King's recently has started naming what we used to call admin, to go and support the kinds of things that are meaningful. So,
I mean, just quickly, I think that talking about academic funding, part of the underlying rationale with that is that academic funding is obviously naturally research oriented, and so if we're talking about occupying this back-end research space, then it's in many ways a more suitable form of funding with more suitable expectations.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, there's a lot of discussion at the moment in theatre about using AIs to create content on stage. So video designers and set designers are using AI now to generatively design content. And it's created a debate about credits. So I wanted to ask just your opinion from your perspective, particularly at a certain time where art is more traditional than it is in the theatre industry. How are you attributing credit to work that's created using an AI when potentially quite a lot of the creativity comes from the coders and the developers of that AI system?
Do you want to?
Yeah, sure.
I think often technology can be a kind of Trojan horse for opening up a lot of the inequalities that already exist in the art world, and the kind of attribution towards a singular artist, I think we can all agree, is somewhat of a farce. And I think in our team and also in other teams in Serpentine, there's a movement towards opening up and crediting huge production teams, maybe following on from the film or theater industry. The way that we credit is to credit all of the developers, to credit any software that's used, especially if it's built on or pulled from open source communities. I can also sort of mention that we have a legal lab as part of the R&D platform, which is researching exactly these kinds of legal gray areas. And we follow the recommendations that we sort of devise within the legal lab, but that's essential to us to credit everyone involved.
Yeah, I think it's an important question. It's a question about authorship in a way. I think it's also relates, or kind of, it sits on top of a more important question actually about labor, because we can change who we credit, and we should, and that's very important. But there's a whole process of collaborative labor undergirding that process of authorship, which often comes after the fact, right? So it's also, I guess, interrogating the conditions people are working in when they contribute to projects which they're not at the head of. But of course, this isn't a domain-specific question about machine learning and art, in the sense that artists have been working with expanded teams for a long time now, particularly fabricators of the dark matter of the art world, as it's sometimes termed. Also needs to be considered when we think about those questions. I do think that when we talk about those authorship questions, there are questions about, I guess, like machine authorship too. I consider that to be very much an open question, but we could talk about it later on as well.
Can I just ask a follow-on to that, because it made me think, with NFTs now, but we love or hate them, but if artists are creating NFT, you've seen these people just like merging famous pictures, Van Gogh with the National and Apollo 11. Do you think that there should be some attribution of the sort of lost the word, the money that comes from the resale of that back to the original authors, particularly people just making NFTs out of anything, using AIs to make them? Is that the same answer?
I would just say, yeah, of course. Simply, I don't know if anyone else.
I think it's a bigger question as well, because obviously we're doing all of this within the context of the university as well, which is obviously a public institution. So we can afford as well to play with ideas and concepts. We're very interested as well in exploring this idea of non-human agency and what matters, what happens there, as well as studying kind of financial models. So I think some of us are not kind of greatly in love with NFTs. We're seeing it, it's like, tulip manias have their charm, but, they also have an expiry date in them. So we're already looking at just slightly suspiciously about what's happening. And universities are these privileged spaces where you can afford to ask these dramatic questions about the economic model and going a little bit against the grain. So maybe that's what we're trying to do as well with that.
Any more questions? Okay, I think we're there, Terry. We can.
Right, thank you, Graham, and thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And also, thank you to the other speakers in this session. Can I just remind